The events of Scripture we read as Bible stories follow a storyline that is intact throughout history. The storyline starts with God's reach towards humanity and unfolds according to humanity's reach back to God, or the absence of that reciprocation. Each story is God's revelation to humanity, and these are revelations of God's character, God's wisdom, God's love, God's justice, God's mercy, God's sovereignty. The list is very long, and each story provides examples of the human Godward reach as we either embrace and celebrate and accept, though we're often forced to wrestle through the implications of God's revelation, or we simply reject God's reach toward us. Metaphorically, we either reach out our arms back to God, or we fold our arms across our hearts and refuse to let God's revelation touch our hearts. The story of Jesus' birth is no exception. In no uncertain terms, we see again God's reach towards humanity. And the story of the birth of Jesus reveals God's love, God's humility, God's wonderful and often mysterious and often miraculous ways. The Christmas story is the first chapter of Christ on the earth, the ultimate expression of God's reach towards humanity. And it happened at a specific time, in a specific place, to specific people. See, how humans respond determines whether we meet God's revelation with joy and wonder and peace, or with fear and doubt and anxiety. And the Christmas story provides a full spectrum of the different ways humans respond to God's revelation. And today I want to highlight the way Mary responds to God's reach toward humanity in the Christmas story. See, Mary was a person of no high consequence. She was an average citizen, a nobody for all intents and purposes. And God sent an angel to speak to her and reveal his heart, reveal his plan for how Jesus would be born on the earth. And her initial response was fear. Scripture says in the first chapter of Luke, she was highly troubled and asked, how can this be? And as she opened her heart, as she remained a willing and curious character in this drama that would be revealed according to God's will, she was brought to a place of acceptance. And ultimately, in the first chapter of Luke, we see her saying, "Be it unto me according to your word, though I don't understand, though I find it hard to believe, though I will be misperceived by my culture and my friends and family and relatives. All of that I leave to you, God, and be it unto me according to your word." See, we have this God-human word reach, God's revelation, God's promise, how it will unfold, and the promise that we don't need to be afraid. And we have every right, we see in the story of Mary, to respond with fear, to respond with doubt, even to respond with shame as the story goes on, as this in the culture, in the time, in the space, her pregnancy would have been met as a scandal. And we have every reason, every human reason to be closed-minded and to fold our hands across our chest and across our hearts and actually remove ourselves from the drama that God is revealing on the earth. And yet, through it all, we see an exemplar in Mary saying, "Be it unto me according to your word." God, your will, not mine, be done. And as history unfolds, we see Mary as a great champion in the Christmas story. And so, in response to God's human word reach, to the revelation of God in the world, Mary responds not with arms folded across her heart, but with arms open and willing, a willing spirit, willing to be named in this chapter of God's dramatic revelation. Mary's joy and wonder and peace in response to God's revelation is a testimony, an example on how we can let our hearts prepare him room, as we sing about in the Christmas carols. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life." Mary's heart was guarded against fear and doubt and shame and anxiety, and as a result, God was able to fill her heart with revelation, and her joy was full. In fact, Mary wrote the first Christmas carol. The lyrics are recorded in Luke chapter 1, and if you listen for it, that spirit with which Mary responds to God is audible in our beloved Christmas carols, these anthems of joy made famous over years of tradition and repetition. See, they are the songs of willing hearts and open arms, reciprocating from humans Godward the reach of God towards humanity.